Hey there, I'm Bruce Ulrich and welcome to my kitchen. Nope, this is not a cooking video, so don't run away if that's not your thing. I'm just in my kitchen because that's where this will live. And this thing is a bent lamination banana hook that I recently made. This was part of the Rocklerbentwoodchallenge Challenge that I'm taking part of. The guys over at the Modern Maker podcast are putting that on, and it just seemed like something fun to kind of tackle a more organically shaped item than I normally do. So let me show you how I made it. I started out by using some cardboard to just mock up my design. This is pretty helpful because it's inexpensive material that a lot of us have access to, and you can kind of work out some of the kinks of the design without really wasting much. I actually had a group of bananas on hand so that I could measure and find the balance in the pivot point so that I can know exactly how tall the piece should be. Then I just started laying out all of my mold designs and cut them out with a utility knife. I used a tailor's flexible measuring tape to get the length of how long my pieces needed to be. Then it was time to rip down some stock. I used cherry, maple, and walnut that I had on hand. I took them to the bandsaw and ripped thin strips out of each. Then I took them to my drum sander until they were about 3/16 of an inch thick. Now it was time to actually make the mold. I cut out a couple of pieces of 3/4 inch MDF that I had using my circular saw. And after gluing 2 sheets together for each mold, I laid out the shapes from my cardboard onto the MDF. Then I took them to the drill press and drilled out a bunch of holes all the way through so that I could use those for clamps. Then it was back to the bandsaw where I cut out each of the mold shapes. I'm doing the type of mold where I only have one side of the mold, not the positive and the negative. So I am about to try bent lamination for the first time. I have all of my strips here. They ended up at about 3/16, maybe a hair less. I'm gonna do 2 different ones because I've got 2 different parts for this thing I'm making. And I don't really know if I can get them around the radius of the mold that I made. It's very sharp. And so I'm actually going to put some hot water in a tub and let these soak for a little while. I'm not sure how long. So it's gonna kind of be like the method of steam box, like steam bending. So that's hopefully going to loosen up the fibers of the wood enough that I can get much more bend out of the same things. So let's see how it goes. I added some packing tape to the faces of the molds so that when I did the glue up, all the glue wouldn't stick to it. Then it was on to actually clamping up my pieces. For the first time, I did it without glue. I let them dry like that and they kept their shape pretty well. Then I went back and added glue and clamped them up again. I wasn't sure how the second mold was going to go because I was actually bending the wood 180 degrees, but it seemed to work just fine. It was a little difficult getting the clamps everywhere, but I wanted to just keep working with it until I got the results. The pieces kept their shape pretty well once I removed the clamps. I'm just using PVA glue here, and I added on a bunch and then went right back to the same molds and started clamping them back together again. I'm not going to say that this wasn't stressful, but it wasn't as stressful as it could have been since the pieces pretty much already had their shape. All I had to deal with was the mess of the glue and the little bit of working time that I had to try to get them all clamped before the glue started to harden. Taking something like this out of the clamps is always a little iffy because you don't know what you're gonna get. And I don't have much expression here on my face because I was probably listening to an audiobook or something, but I was really happy overall with how they turned out. I took my pieces to the bandsaw and cut off the ends that I either didn't need or that kind of delaminated because I wasn't able to clamp them properly. Then I cleaned up the edges by ripping them on the bandsaw using my fence. I spent a little time with the random orbit sander cleaning off the glue, and I had to be really careful not to sand through the top veneer. The vertical piece needed to match up with the base, which was curved 180 degrees, so I ended up having to file a radius on the section where they would meet. Then I turned my attention onto the hook that would actually hold the bananas. I chose to use a piece of walnut for this, and I started by sketching out a rough shape of the hook that I wanted and then started cutting out the hook on the bandsaw. I do have a pretty thick blade on the bandsaw right now, and I didn't feel like changing it, so I just went slow and made some relief cuts, and it worked just fine. Next, I spent what felt like an eternity with files and rasps and sanding, just cleaning up and shaping this hook how I wanted it to look. It needed to actually be able to connect to the bent laminated parts and actually hold bananas. So it wasn't just a matter of a shape that looked good, it needed to function. I tried to hold some material behind this as I drilled through it because I'm going to add a couple of dowels to secure everything. And it worked okay. I lost one little piece of the edge. The material must not have been supported enough. I mixed up some 5-minute epoxy and cut a couple of dowels and secured them through those holes I just drilled. I even thought ahead and put a little makeshift dam with tape so that the epoxy wouldn't spill all over everything. Once it dried, I came back with a flush trim saw and cut the dowels off, and then it was back to the rasps and files to clean up the epoxy. I had to drill the holes to attach the vertical piece to the base for this one, but this time I was able to secure a piece of plywood to the back side where the exit of the cut would be. That way the material was fully supported, and when I drilled through them there was actually no splitting and no tear out. I trimmed the base a little bit because it was longer than I needed it to be, and then I just rounded over the top section of the ends with my random orbit sander. After a little time hand sanding to make sure everything was smooth and all of the sharp edges were broken, I was able to add some finish. You've seen me use this finish plenty of times by now. It's Mahoney's walnut oil, and I really like the way it works on projects like this. I loved the contrast in the different woods that I used, and there was even a hot debate on my Instagram of whether this looked like a swan or a scorpion. So, tell me, are you team swan or team scorpion? I have a lot of fun interacting with people on my projects over on Instagram. If you want to, head over there and check it out and see some of the behind the scenes stuff. I'd love to chat with you there. So I really like how this thing turned out. It was quite challenging. I don't often build things with this much of an organic feel with curves, but it was interesting the challenges that came up because of that, with all of the different shaping of the pieces and then actually, securing the different pieces to one another. This actually has no mechanical fasteners in it, so no screws, it's all wood. So I'd love to know what you think about it. Leave me a comment down below. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.